What is this, Tommy's Guide? Hey everyone, and welcome to another Range Rant on March 9234. Today I'll be discussing episode 18 from MMPR Season 2 titled White Light Part 2. Now this episode's adapted from episode 18 of Die Rangers, but only for the Zord footage. Other than that, the entire main story is American made only. Now the episode resumes right where we left off, where we see all the Rangers are basically waiting for Zordon to finally call them in and finally tell them when the White Ranger is ready. So eventually, Zordon and Alpha have finally completed all their, preparations with the White Ranger suit and are ready to finally, tell the Rangers to finally head to the command center. Now, the thing that always kind of felt weird with me, of course, Zordon and Alpha didn't know what was going on. They didn't know that Billy has spied on them or anything. And when Zordon finally called, the Rangers to head to the command center and are waiting to, find out who the White Ranger is, no one actually admitted to Zordon that, yeah, we actually knew the White Ranger existed before you told us. We kind of spied on you. No one really admitted that. Everyone acted like, this was all brand new. So, of course, in the huge, big reveal of the White Ranger, we're slowly being lowered down to the ground. I always thought this was really over the top. I know a lot of people actually love this scene because, it's super dramatic and it's the return of Tommy, the new 6th Ranger, new suit, new everything. But I always thought it was a little bit over ridiculous because I'm like, are they treating Tommy as a god or some kind in this moment? I also thought it was kind of weird that he was coming from above while Tommy and the White Ranger suit are being constructed underground. I also like to point out that this was the very first time Koichi Sakamoto, one of the executive producers and the stunt coordinator for MMPR, all the way through RPM, began his work. He was the one who actually lowered JDF through the light. Now, once the White Ranger finally, lands onto the floor and finally, opens up his helmet, which is probably the only time we actually ever see the Power Rangers ever use the class on the helmet. Usually this is never really allowed because, again, it kind of breaks the fantasy elements of the Ranger suits being like kind of, magical or scientific. So everyone's holding their breath because they're hoping that it's going to be Tommy, but they're not really sure if it's going to be a new person. And of course, Kimberly faints because of the apprehension. Once the White Ranger helmet's finally removed and we see Tommy's face, everyone is, of course, relieved that, it's Tommy, and is finally introducing everyone to his new abilities and, of course, trying to wrap up all the loose ends of like, why? Well, I thought Tommy's powers were gone. Now, basically in the PR universe, when you strip someone's powers, the powers of that Ranger suit specifically are removed, not the ability of the human being able to handle a new Ranger powers. Now, I do like to point out a few minor mistakes in the White Ranger suit versus the Die Ranger's version of the suit. Now, for the most part, the suits are nearly identical compared to what happened to the Green Ranger suit. Remember in earlier rant episodes, I basically said that the stunt guy and JDF didn't like how the Japanese version of the shield on the Green Ranger suit was, so they made a crappier version of it in that case. But for the White Ranger, nearly everything's identical except for one minor detail, usually are the short sleeves on the Die Ranger suits. If you look at Tommy's suit in the Die Ranger footage, you can see that the short sleeves are not really connected, but in MMPR's case, they actually just sewed on the gold edging around the suit to simulate short sleeves. Although the suit does bring up an issue. Where does the Power Morpher go? As everyone knows, that the Power Morpher is always on the belt buckle on the front of on the MMPR suits. But in this case, for the White Ranger, they couldn't do that because, again, Die Ranger is not Jew Rangers, so they couldn't actually stick the Power Morpher on it. But where does the Power Morpher go? This was really never answered. Now, the thing I really hated about this, 2 years in a row, multiple suits, and all this dramatic reveal of the White Ranger, the Green Ranger, and this entire time, Bandai never released a gold Power Morpher. Till this day, I never understood this. Tommy is one of the most popular Rangers of all time. But for some reason, Bandai thought, oh, no one's going to want the gold Power Morpher. So while the Rangers are finally, relieved and welcoming back Tommy to the Ranger team, and of course waking Kimberly up from being fainted, Zordon all of a sudden gives us a quick line of the new leader of the Power Rangers being Tommy. Now this kind of confused a lot of people because mainly the moment Zordon said that, wouldn't, Jason be kind of pissed off and ask for a reasonable explanation of why he was being demoted from being team leader. Now the main reason why this happened was because this line was added at the last minute. Unfortunately, at this point in time during post-production, the trio already has left the show. That's the reason why this line was added at the last minute, and that's the reason why Jason doesn't have like any kind of look or remark to why he was demoted from being leader to just being a regular standard ranger. So we finally head back to Bulk Skull, what's been going on with Rita's dumpster, and basically we see that they've been having a huge amount of trouble opening up Rita's dumpster to the point of basic exhaustion. At the last minute, Skull basically thinks up a ridiculous plan to head to Ernie's and to figure out what to do in order to get it to open. So unfortunately, when we head back to the command center, we find out that, Nimrod is coming out again. And of course, the Rangers are unable to do anything because, again, in the last previous fight, the Zords were badly damaged and they have to be under repair. This basically means that the White Ranger has to fight Nimrod alone. Just at the wrong moment, the viewing globe basically finds out that Rita's back on Earth, and Bulk and Skull are basically trying to open up the dumpster with a huge can opener. Of course, now the Rangers don't know what to do because they have to fight Nimrod, and they basically have to get Rita away from Bulk and Skull in order to stop them opening it. Now, the thing that was kind of confusing is that Trini basically said that if we don't stop Bulk and Skull opening Rita's dumpster, our cover will be blown. What cover? Would Rita really waste her time to explain that, the Power Rangers are Zach, Kimberly, Trini, Jason, and Tommy, and Billy? No, either hurt Bulk and Skull, turn them into some kind of, lizards or monkeys or something, and go away. She wouldn't waste her time exposing the Rangers' secret identity, so I thought this remark was kind of like pointless. Rangers have to basically break up into teams. Trini and Billy are sent to the Zord Bay and are working on the repairs to the other Zords. Jason, Zach, and Kimberly are sent to stop Bulk and Skull, while Tommy faces off Nimrod and the other two. Just before Tommy begins the fight, we get introduced to one more character, Saba the Talking Sword. Now, I always thought this was a very cool and unique thing for Power Rangers when we had a talking sword. Now, the cool thing, though, is that Saba is voiced by Tony Oliver, one of the primary writers for MMPR, and also Tommy's last namesake. The thing I really hate, though, is that Saba across the series was just barely ever used, unfortunately. Now, when Tommy heads to the monster fight, there was a bit of incorrect usage of the morphing sequence. Normally, whenever a Ranger's in the command center but they're helmetless, they're basically in their standby mode. And usually when they go from the command center back to the monster fight, they always call out back to action. But in this case, Tommy remorphs, which was kind of stupid because he was already morphed up. All he had to do was put his helmet back on. Now, the thing that was kind of confusing is that Jason, Zach, and Kimberly morphed with Tommy. Jason, Zach, and Kimberly were supposed to head to Bulk and Skull's location, but all of a sudden they were attacked by putties for no apparent reason. Because if you think about it, Lord Zedden didn't know Rita came back onto the planet. So why did the putties attack Jason, Kimberly, and Zach for no apparent reason at all? Just to basically stop them for what? So finally, we see Tommy in his full White Ranger gear, and we get the first introduction to the new Tiger Zord. Now, this whole sequence is basically from Die Rangers episode 18. Now, there are kind of continuity issues with using this footage. Now, for the people who don't know, in Die Rangers, the 6th Ranger in Die Rangers is Cole. He's a kid. He's just a young kid, like 12, 13-year-old being a Ranger. So we kind of have like the precursor of what happened in Turbo with Justin here in Die Rangers. That's the reason why the White Ranger is kind of acting a little bit over the top and kind of ridiculous. Normally, Tommy wouldn't be jumping up like crazy all over the place as a Ranger. Now, the Zord fight was basically extended between Nimrod and the Tiger Zord. Now, originally in the Die Ranger footage, basically what happened was, yes, we got that little comical moment with the Tiger Zord falling down on the ground because, again, at this point, Ko doesn't really know how to pilot the Tiger Zord, so he falls down on the ground. What happened in MMPR, they kind of extended the sequence and changed things around. They basically extended how long of the Tiger Zord was on the floor with using footage from later on where the Tiger Zord was damaged. That's the reason why seeing the Tiger Zord fall, but all of a sudden we see it's smoking for no apparent reason. So eventually Tommy gets used to the Tiger Zord and orders the transformation sequence. Now, the thing that was kind of confusing in this scene is that, Nimrod and the other two are women. They're all women monsters. But the weird thing is that Nimrod's line basically said, "Let's go, boys." I don't understand why the writers missed that specific detail. So the Tiger Zord is basically outmatched, and eventually we head back to the other Rangers fighting the putties. Again, thanks to the trio walking off set, all the dialogue between Jason and Zach, and of course the new voices of the cast members. And unfortunately, also you get reuse of audio from past episodes when anytime Jason was speaking during the fight. The audio quality lowers at that point, and other times it's normal. So we head back to the Tigerzord fight, and we finally get introduced to one of the Tigerzord's main primary finisher move, where we see him, takes one of the orbs behind him and throws it into the launcher, and eventually shoots out his fireball move. Now this is where we get introduced for the very first time the infamous repeated shot of the White Ranger laughing. Now the reason why this happened in various episodes is because Cove, unfortunately, since he was a child actor, they couldn't use him so much, so the Sixth Ranger and Die Rangers was hardly ever used. He was not the primary focus. The main team was the primary focus, so unfortunately, whenever we had to use the Japanese footage, they would have to constantly always recycle a lot of the interiors. Unfortunately, the laughing sequence was the one that was constantly used. It also caused continuity issues because we're always seeing the energy orb of fire missing in the background. Now, eventually, Nimrod and the other girls finally overpower the Tigerzord and temporarily disable the Tigerzord while Tommy is basically asking, where's Jason, why isn't he responding? Now, this scene was a bit awkward because why wouldn't Jason respond? It doesn't really make any sense. Since Austin J. Stahn, walked off the set, there's no one there to record extra lines. Now, here comes the biggest issue of not allowing the use of the Die Ranger cockpit footage. Now, in Die Rangers, the primary cockpit is actually inside the Red Dragon Zord. But since we can't show the Die Ranger suits and the Red Ranger inside the Dragon Zord, the Red Ranger actually has no spoken lines at all, and Tommy's basically, basically controlling the entire scene. Now, this does work in one specific way, since Austin St. John simply just quit, they don't have to basically, record any lines for him, so they could leave him blank and let Tommy control it. But if you watch the scene, it doesn't really make any sense why Jason's not talking and we're not getting any, shots from inside the Red Dragon Zord. So finally, just at the last minute, all the Zords are finally, repaired, and they can finally introduce the Mega Tigerzord. Now, this is very reminiscent to Dragon Zord Battle Mode in the very similar sense where, it combines with the feed and switches over from the Red Ranger's main usage to the Sixth Ranger's usage for the suit. The good thing, though, is they actually don't omit, the girl of the team, because usually, because like last time, in that combination, Dragon Zord Battle Mode, the Pink Ranger was totally ignored in that sequence, and finally is able to defeat Nimrod and the two girl monsters. Now, the thing that was kind of weird, though, is that, in this entire episode, there was no Lord Zed footage at all. Nothing. We didn't get any intro in the beginning of the episode, nor do we get any, the usual payoff where, Lord Zed is, pissed off and is, threatening to, hurt Goldar or Squat and Babu because they're laughing and stuff. Nothing. He was just basically totally ignored, which mainly causes the issue with the putty controls coming out of nowhere and stopping, Jason and Zach and Kimberly going to Bulk and Skull. So unfortunately, eventually Bulk and Skull finally open up Rita's dumpster, and she finally gets out of there. And of course, Bulk and Skull are at least scared of Rita at this point, which is kind of odd though, because she's really just a tiny little woman at this point. But I do like the line where she says, "Oh great, this is basically the human versions of Squat and Babu," which is ironically correct. Squat and Babu are basically Bulk and Skull. So as usual, when Bulk and Skull get scared, they eventually pass out. But fortunately enough, this happens at the perfect time where we see all the Rangers finally arrive and actually, reseal Rita back into her dumpster and send her away. Now here comes the weird part. Now, Bulk and Skull eventually are waking up basically like Trini and Kimberly inside their garage. Why wasn't Bulk and Skull confused why they were there? I mean, I'm puzzled why no one asked how they got in. Did their parents know they were in there? Nothing. They were just like, look out for Rita behind us, and they were just having this weird moment where, she wasn't there anymore and everyone was relieved, but no one asked the obvious question, how they got in. So of course at the end of the episode we finally head back to, the juice bar, and we finally get the payoff, the surprise party that Kimberly has said back in the first part of the episode. I do like the attention to detail to Tommy's cake. Tommy's Welcome Back Tommy is in green, which is perfectly correct, because at that point in time when they were making the cake, they would have ordered green instead of white. So while Ernie's making the cake, we see that Richie has come back to, he's just basically won a tournament, and we're trying to get that little tease of the Trini-Richie relationship, which unfortunately, again, this is totally waste because in a few episodes it's just going to be totally dropped because thanks to the trio leaving. So overall, I have to give this episode a 4 out of 5. I mean, it was a really good episode. I mean, it had its issues. Zordon not asking, like, how did you know about the White Rangers? They didn't say that we were eavesdropping on you. And of course, no one basically objecting why Zordon and Alpha leave, don't tell them what they're going on. I really didn't like that aspect of the story being totally ignored. And other things where, Lord Zed wasn't in the episode at all. It didn't really make any sense why there was nothing, at least not even one scene with Lord Zed. but my favorite part was the reintroduction of Tommy being the White Ranger. Yes, I didn't like the moment where they over-dramatized where Tommy was being lowered down to the ground. I didn't like that part, but the part where, you know, everyone was relieved and totally happy that Tommy's back. Because again, the MMPR team always had that special spark for whatever reason. The cast members always worked very well with each other, and they always had this great, really on-screen presence, where it's rarely ever matched in succeeding Power Ranger seasons. So whenever I see this moment, I always feel like, yeah, the team is back together, and that's the reason why I watch this show. What do you guys personally think? Do you think this show was, you know, amazing because, again, we get introduced to Tommy as the White Ranger, he has this huge dramatic moment? Or do you agree with me because that the episode was kind of stupid in some places where, like, you know, where Zach, Jason, and Kimberly are heading to Bulk so but they can interrupt the putties for no reasons? Or basically how Jason got screwed out of being a leader and really having no response to that? Of course, leave your comments below on what you think about this episode. And of course, leave your suggestions below on what future episodes you would like me to review. For next week's rant, I'll be discussing Putty on the Brain. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you guys right back here next week.